Hello everyone, hope you have all settled down. Now before we could start, I believe you got your GC3 textbooks and any other documents supporting your GC3 practical assessment. Alright, so we'll discuss what is about GC3, what I'm supposed to write when I prepare a report. I would request you to make a note of each and every single observation, each and every single information that I'm going to discuss here. We'll get started with the practical assessment paper. Before that, we'll have a small information that we need to know when you prepare a practical report. Now, do we know how much to score in a practical report for me to pass that particular paper? Now, GC3, you score 60 out of 100. So we know IGC1 is 45 out of 100, GC2 is 45 out of 100. Whereas your practical report, you score 60 out of 100 for you to pass this examination. I'll assist you to get this, to cross the 60 bar. We'll get started with other sections that I'm supposed to. We'll get started with the other section we're going to cover in this report. Well, when I talk about GC3, we all know it is divided into two sections. One is your observation part. And then comes your management section. Now these are the two sections that we are going to discuss under this practical assessment. Well, I said 60. Now out of this 100, now 30 marks are given for your observation, whereas 70 marks are given for your management section. So we know which area we need to focus. Remember that observation shows how good are we in observing any particular activities or situation. This observation will help you to prepare this management report. We'll start one by one. Under observation, we have different section has to be covered. Under management, we have different section that has to be covered. So I will be teaching you each and every single section of it. We'll get started with your observation. Alright, so like I said, observation. So we have divided this into three sections. Now, how to write an observation and what are things has to be written under observation. Well, your first column is given for hazard and consequences. Then your second column is given for control measures. Well, the third column is given for your time scale. What has to be written under each section? Take your first hazard and consequences. Now, under observation, you're going to do an inspection in your workplace and identify the unsafe fact and the unsafe condition in your workplace. Now, the unsafe fact and unsafe condition are the reason behind any accidents. We all know that. So, unsafe fact and unsafe condition, it should be an event that has to be identified. Then what are the risks associated with that identified unsafe fact or unsafe conditions? Well, if there is any risk associated, there should be some consequences. There should be some result, right? The outcome. So that outcome is nothing but your consequences. Now these consequences, now what are the things has to be followed? Unsafe fact and unsafe condition, it has to be a situation rather than writing as one word. I'll give an example once we're done with this explanation. Risk associated must be most relevant with the scenario that you have narrated here. The consequences must be relevant to that risk that you have mentioned. So it has to be chained. There should be a link between all the three. So the risk associated must be matching with the scenario you have written. The consequences must be more relevant to that risk that you have identified. Writing a consequence is very important thing that you need to write it as specific. Now, what is consequences are the outcome of that particular risk. It could be any health effects, could be any physical injuries, could be any property damages or any environmental effects. Any consequences that you're going to write has to be specific. Alright, so we have witnessed one unsafe fact or unsafe condition. Our responsibility is to stop that act or to correct that particular unsafe fact you have identified. Well, what action that you will take to correct that incident or scenario you have witnessed? So that becomes your immediate action. Well, you have to save the future day as well. So that action will be your long-term action. So your corrective action and your preventive action will be written under your control measures. How much time you require to implement this control measures? How much time you are required to implement the corrective, the immediate and the long-term actions? Time scale accordingly has to be written. Let's take an example under each section and we'll clear this particular observation sheet along with the instruction. So let's take an example under observation. Well, I've written an example here. Let's read that. I've observed worker painting using an unprotected working platform, also without a safety harness. Is it an unsafe fact or an unsafe condition? Well, working using an unprotected edge, it's an unsafe condition. And it's also failed to use a safety harness, that's an unsafe fact. Is there any risk associated with this event? Yes. So risk associated, what could be the risk? The possible risk, probably the person may fall from height. So I've identified this risk. So there's a risk of this person, this worker can fall from height. Well, what happens if the person fall from height? So if I fall from height, probably depends upon the height, the severity increases, right? So probably I can end up with any disabling injuries. Probably I can have a fracture. So your consequences, rather than writing injuries, I would write a specific consequences, such as, so this risk can lead to any fracture or any disabling injuries. So there ends your first observation. So we'll have a quick recap. So I've identified the unsafe fact and unsafe condition because I've mentioned both an unprotected edge as well as, an unprotected working platform and a person working without a safety harness. What is the risk associated? I've written there's a possibility the person can fall from height. What happens when the person falls from height? There's a consequences which can lead to any bone fracture or probably any disabling injuries. So this gives a clear picture for the assessor that this is your observation, these are the risks and consequences associated. How many observations I need to write? You are expected to write 20 to 25 unsafe factor, unsafe condition. Alright, so you would write 20 to 25 number of observations under this particular section. So which means under the first column, hazard and consequences. When you write this observation, make sure you are not repeating any work activities that you have written already, right? When you repeat any work activities, that will limit your observation skill. So try to observe many unsafe factors and many unsafe conditions so that you have a good discussion and good number of observation for your section. Another thing has to be kept in mind, writing this particular observation, you will categorize your observation under a particular hazard. Now let's say this is a poor work practice, or probably I can give examples on any fire category. I can give examples on an electrical safety or any chemical safety. So overall, when you write, you categorize your hazard. So you categorize your observation, which has to cover minimum 5 category of hazard. I hope that's clear. We'll jump to our next session. So remember the observation, the example that we have just discussed. Now we're talking about the control measures. So like I said, you need to write both corrective and preventive. That's your immediate and your long-term action. So these are my immediate suggestion. So I've said you stop the activity because you have just witnessed a person performing an unsafe event. So I've stopped that activity and then I need to provide them a mobile scaffold because it was an unprotected working platform. So I have to give a safe scaffold, mobile scaffold. Then I've also suggested to give him a safety harness. So now keeping a closer look on this particular control measures, I'm being very specific. Now most of the time we tend to write provide PPE. You need to be specific on what type of PPE that has to be provided. So these are my immediate action. On the right side you would see a time scale. So these are my time scale I have suggested for me to provide this control measures. How much time you require to stop the task? You do it immediately. How much time you require to give a scaffold or a PPE like harness? You require like a time of 60 minutes or within 60 minutes or more than 60 minutes. Any time which has to be specific. Now either you can give individual time scale or you can club them up and you can give one time scale, but you need to mention that this given time scale is for the both control measures. We'll see the long-term actions now. So the previous was your immediate action. So now we are talking about the long-term action. So long-term action, I have suggested plan for a daily toolbox talk on your work activity, and I've given a time scale of 3 days. And then I've given another long-term action such as providing work at height safety training. I've given a week time. Now remember, these time scale that you see are the time period you require for you to implement that particular control measures. I cannot implement a training immediately. I need to plan. There are a lot of requirements for the training, and then I would implement that training. So these time scale that you see are the period that you require to implement your control measures. Now, keeping another closer look on my control measures, I'm being very specific on what type of training I have to provide. Now, most in case we provide training or provide inspections or monitoring. Now, I can ask a question. If it is training, on what? If it is inspection, on what? So be very specific on what type of control measures are you giving. We're done with this immediate and long-term actions. So going back, a quick recap on observation. We have discussed an example, that is your unsafe factor, unsafe condition. We have written risk associated, and we have given specific consequences. For the same, I have suggested you immediate actions, the long-term actions, and the time scale for the control measures I have suggested. So overall, you are expected to write 20 to 25 number of unsafe factor, unsafe condition. Of course, yes, you can give some good practices. However, good practices has got only 1 mark. So the remaining focus are majorly given on this unsafe factor and unsafe conditions. Keeping the things that you're not supposed to do, that are not repeating activities, not giving general control measures, you would fulfill this observation part. How these marks are allotted. Now you have saw 3 sections. So you have seen 3 sections. The first section for hazard consequences, then comes your control measures along with your time scale. Now this hazard and consequences section that you saw, it plays an individual role, whereas the control measures and the time scale are combined together. So 15 is how allocated. For more clear description in your observation sheet, you have appendix 2, where you have a clear marked matrix which will give you an idea when you write an observation, where do I stand, how much will I get, so you can assume so you can predict the number of marks that you stands on with the help of that matrix. We'll move to your next section. So coming back to your next section, that's your management. So like I said, 30 marks was for your observation, 70 marks is for your management section. Now how the 70 marks are distributed? Now it is distributed for these 5 sections. So you have introduction, which score 5 marks, Aggregated Summary, which is again for 5 marks, then you have your main findings, 30 marks, then you have conclusion, recommendation, 15 each. We'll see one by one. Well, these are the order of arrangement. So now we'll see your introduction first, then we'll see your main findings, then we'll see your conclusions and your recommendations. So then you will see your conclusions and your recommendations, and we'll end with your executive summary. Let's start with your introduction. Alright, so we'll start with your first section under your management. So that's your introduction. Now at the end of your GC3 textbooks, you have a checklist. Now this checklist is given for each and every single section of your main finding. This checklist will help you to identify whether you have met the criteria of your GC3 practical report or not. Under introduction, in your checklist, you will find these points. Now, when you write introduction, you are introducing the workplace that you have selected for this inspection. Now, people might have taken 2-3 departments, people might have taken some different location within a workplace. You can specify all together. You need not to give, I would advise you not to take 2 different organizations for your inspection, because that will make you difficult in describing or discussing this introduction. So focus on one organizations, and you can choose several departments, absolutely fine. When you write introduction, you are going to introduce the workplace you have selected for this inspection. Now your introduction should contain the place, the location of the place and location of the workplace selected for inspection, date and time you have started your inspection. Now some description about the company or some description about the workplace selected, such as the business, when it was founded, what are they into, what are their upcoming projects. So you can give a rough idea about that particular organization. You can also talk about the number of employees working and their shift patterns. You can talk about the different type of equipments that has been used. You can also talk about the different type of work activities performed, what all equipments that has been used, machinery details, and also you can give some other basic details that you have. So you can also include the work activities carried out, talk about the number of equipments that has been used or different type of equipments that has been used. You close this introduction with the objective. Now, what is the objective or aim for me carrying out this inspection? In order for me to identify whether the health and safety parameters are met, whether the health and safety management systems are effective. So this would be my objective. Please do not write this objective is for the NEBOSH GC3 practical examination. We are performing an inspection report, so we'll focus on this health and safety matters. We'll jump to your next section. Introduction. Followed by your introduction, your next section is main findings. Now, main finding is of 30 marks. So the immediate thought that comes in my mind, 30 marks, so I need to write a lot. Absolutely not. Be very specific, be crystal clear, rather than exaggerating or elaborating your section. Just focus on the keyword, just focus on what exactly you want to explain. Well, main finding is written main finding is written based on the observation sheet. Now remember, you have identified 20 to 25 unsafe act and unsafe conditions. Now, out of which there could be few which are critical, which has to be dealt immediately, right? So based on the priority, we have to take an immediate action for those critical issues. Main finding is basically not targeting any observation individually, but it is targeting the category of hazard. Now, when I say category of hazards, you have fire, you got electricity, so you have many hazards. You have biological hazards, you have mechanical hazards, you have ergonomic hazards, so you can categorize these issues that has been identified. Let's take an example of fire. Now imagine out of 20 to 25 observation, probably, like I said, your main finding section suggested for you to write in 3 different parts. For your first part, where you discuss the issues identified certain categories. Now, like I said earlier, you have different category of hazard like fire, electricity, or chemical or biological. Let's take an example. Let's take a category as fire. You can refer the GC3 sample instruction for this particular section. So you will find an example. I believe you are with the documents. So you would find that example and you can compare whether we have met this criteria or not. We'll move to your next section. Hope your main finding section was pretty much clear. Now your next section is on conclusion. 15 marks again. Now remember, this section is where you show your caliber. How good am I convincing my management? Well, writing this section, keeping this in mind, now you're going to conclude your overall inspections. Now write this 3 part which must be reflecting on your report. Now when you write this 3 part, it must reflect on your report. What are these 3 parts? First, you include the discussion of issues that has been identified. When you conclude the report, give a good note. Says that based on the inspection carried out, there have been several good activities identified. There are some unsafe facts also discussed in this report, such as, and then you can discuss the issues that you have identified. Yes, you can stress on the main findings because that is where we have targeted. Those are the critical issues that we are keeping on in front of our management. So discussing or stressing more on the critical issues, and then what are recommendations that has been suggested. Yes, you have given some good number of control measures. Please suggest these control measures here. Discussion. There are 2 different things. Writing as it is and discussions are 2 different things. Well, here we are not writing as it is. We are going to discuss things. So we have discussed issues identified. We have discussed this recommendation suggested. Do you think your management will easily get convinced suggesting your recommendations? Do you think your management will easily get convinced and accept your suggested recommendations? Absolutely not. How can you convince? Well, I can convince only in 2 ways. Either I talk about the benefits they are going to get, or we are going to talk about the consequences. Decide which will be more relevant for the convincing and show your convincing skill on this particular section. Now, since 15 marks, once again, don't elaborate a lot. Please be very clear with this explanation. However, these things that has been mentioned here has to be in your conclusion. We'll move to your next section. Moving to your next section, that's your recommendation column for another 15 marks. Well, recommendation is always written in a tabular column. Recommendation is only for your 5 main findings, not for your entire 25 observation. Well, take examples. So the first column, so you have 4 sections. So under the first column, you have this recommendation. Now take example on your first main findings. You have given some additional control measures. Now write just exactly, mention the same control measures here. You need not to write a load of control measures, but you can give some more effective control measure that you have suggested under main findings. Your next column is on resources implication, which means what all things that you require in order to fulfill or meet this recommendation suggested. It could be money, it could be any resources, or it could be any manpowers, working hours, times. Any resources that require to fulfill this recommendation has to be mentioned here. Try not to give a lump sum amount, just try to break down the amounts so that you have a better discussion on this particular section. Moving down, that's your priority. Now prioritize your control measure based on the risk level. Now moving down, the last column is on target date, when you want me to implement this control measures. Now need not to give individual time frame, but you can give the overall control measures and the overall time scale. Always there's a connection between your priority and target date. If it is high priority, we would try to deal that case as soon as possible. So give the shortest time frame for you to implement this control measures. If it is medium priority, accordingly you can give your target date. So this is for your first main finding. Similarly, you would write for the remaining 4. So all 5 main findings would be covered under this particular section. I hope you're clear with this particular section. Now we'll see about the next executive summary, and we would conclude this entire GC3 practical work. Last section is on executive summary, which is of 5 marks. Now we are going to summarize your entire observation under this section. Now under this section you're expected to write the overview, just the overview of your observations, your main findings and your conclusion and what recommendation has been suggested. Need not to discuss the entire issues or need not to discuss the entire main findings. You can overview, just give the overview of your issues identified, recommendations suggested. Very important is giving the benefits to management. How a management will be benefited if they are going to implement the recommendation that you have suggested. So since it's 5 marks, the page that your manager would be reviewing, make it more impressive, not targeting the consequences but targeting the benefits. So here we conclude this entire session, and here we'll finish up with this GC3 workshop. So once again, a quick recap. You have your observation, that's how we're going to start your report, then followed by your management section, which has your introductions, then comes your main findings, your conclusions, and you have suggested recommendations, and last is your executive summary. Now we all know to pass this examination we have to score 60 out of 100. Keeping this in mind, keeping all the instruction that has been discussed, try to be more precise, try to be more specific in what you're explaining or what you're suggesting. Along with this GC3 instruction, there are other things which has to be kept, such as your document that has to be used, the document that is supposed to be referred, information that you need to know when you fill this assessment papers. Now you have the most updated GC3 templates that you would receive from your NEBOSH website itself. Now appendix 1 is on the declaration form. Signing that declaration is mandatory by the candidate. That shows this report belongs to that candidate. Other than which you have the remaining documents must be used. Filling up your student number, filling up the student name, the date of inspection, filling up the sheet numbers, then you mention the locations of your workplace. Every sheet is mandatory. Along with this, please do not attach any photographs or any external documents other than these templates. I hope this entire instruction is pretty much clear. For your attention, see you in the next class.